Hi everybody, I'm Tim from troutandfeather.com, and in this fly tying video we're going to talk about the essential materials you need to tie mayfly nymphs. Stay tuned. In early 2015, I released a video titled Purchasing Dry Fly Materials, and in it I basically went through my material collection related to dry flies and made recommendations as to those materials that I think are absolutely essential and needed on a regular basis at your fly tying desk. Once that video went live, I instantly received a lot of great feedback, and then the emails started with people asking, when are you going to make the same type of video but for nymphs? I thought to myself, this should be pretty easy, so I sat back and started generating a list, and pretty soon that grew to 2 pages, and 3 pages, and 4 pages, and I soon realized that it was not going to be an easy task. So I took another step back and I looked through my fly boxes, and I quickly realized that as fly fishermen, we have a ton of different nymphs out there. I'm talking about jig nymphs, mayfly nymphs, caddis, stoneflies, attractor nymphs. And even though there's a lot of overlap within those categories, it's really difficult to say that we have just one list of materials for all those ones combined. Instead, I've decided to just take out one of those segments and concentrate on mayfly nymphs, which is going to be the main topic of this video. To give you an overview, what I'm first going to do is talk about the mayfly nymph, talk a little bit about its entomology, and then from there, go through my specific recommendations. I'm going to be giving you 2 tiers. That first tier is going to be those that I absolutely say that you must have if you're tying mayfly nymphs, whereas the second tier is going to be considered an optional list of items. So basically, if you're just getting into fly tying and you don't have a ton of money you want to just throw into this great hobby, you can just go with that initial list and then supplement with those tier 2 items as the need arises. The one thing I do want to kind of caution everybody right out the gate is that I'm going to try my best not to make a specific recommendation for a brand. There are a lot of great brands out there. Some I've had more success with than others, but I'm going to just focus on the materials as much as possible. And then finally, if you're thinking about a section and you really say to yourself, geez, Tim missed that one, then by all means, please mention so in the comments section, because this is definitely an overwhelming task to basically take all the materials and make it into one simple and refined list. It's really difficult. So if there's something that you see missing from that list that you think is an absolutely must-have, then by all means, please comment in the comments section below so others can see what else I probably missed. So with that said, let's now start talking a little bit more about the entomology and basically the makeup of a mayfly nymph. A large portion of a trout's diet can be made up of mayfly nymphs. Thus, we have to do our due diligence in understanding both their behavior and what the nymphs look like so we can best imitate them, or at least attempt to, at the fly tying bench. Now, there are a couple books that I'm going to absolutely recommend as resources for all of you to check out. One of them is a little bit more on the technical side, and another one's geared towards beginners and intermediates. The technical one is called Hatches 2. It was written by Al Cucci and Bob Nastasi. It's just an absolute excellent resource that gives some very specific details and information for all types of flies found in North America. The second book that I really recommend is known as Trout and Their Food. It's written by Dave Whitlock, easily one of our fly fishing ambassadors of our country, and it just gives a really great overview of all the different food types out there that trout will definitely gorge on, mayflies being one of those components. Thus, it's really a quick read that can kind of get you started in that right direction, basically making you want more information and thus entering Hatches Part 2. So that's just a little bit of background information related to some resources that you can check out, aside from just doing a simple Google search. Now, the one thing that I really want to concentrate on is understanding what mayflies look like, because if we know what they look like, we have a better chance of imitating them at the bench. Now, I'm going to kind of reach outside my normal comfort zone in this video. I'm going to pull in my iPad, and I'm going to try to do a quick drawing of a mayfly nymph, talk my way through it, then show it to you after I'm finished. Maybe. I'm not sure how it's going to come out. So for starters, whenever I think about what I know already regarding mayflies, the nymphs have 3 tails. Moving forward, they have an abdomen that can be a little bit on the slender side, but that abdomen has typically, I believe, 10 parts, 10 sections. I won't draw in all 10 of those. And as the mayfly becomes more mature, the nymph becomes more mature, there are prominent gills that will form on both sides of that abdomen. As we move a little bit closer towards the head, we have a larger thorax. There'll be 3 legs off each side of that thorax. Then we have a head with the eyes. And then one other prominent feature of mayfly nymphs can be the wings starting to get exposed coming off the back of the thorax. And they could be really darker wing pads. So, I'm not sure if you can see this or if you even want to see it, but here's just my quick iPad drawing of a mayfly nymph, and I'm gonna get that out of there. Now, whenever I think about some of these body parts that I just drew in, I'm gonna think a little bit more about what they look like specifically. For instance, a lot of the times there's barring on the tails. It could be light or it could be dark barring, but that's something that we want to take into consideration when we're trying to imitate that. Also, in general, mayfly nymphs tend to be more on the thin side and a little bit wider. Yet whenever we tie them on the hook in the round, we're basically making them even, or we'll just say a perfect diameter the whole way around the fly, and that may not really be the best representation of a mayfly nymph. So that's another consideration that we have to take in mind. Finally, they do have 2 antennae that come off the front of the head. Though they're really minute, it's really small, and it's something that, in my opinion anyway, I don't believe that trout key on. Thus, we're not going to worry about that whenever we're completing our imitations. So, taking a step back and kind of thinking about mayfly nymphs in general, that will kind of give us that starting point for us to now bring in some of the materials. So with that said, let me just take us step by step through some of the materials that I find as those that are essential ones if we're trying to imitate mayfly nymphs. An area of fly tying that I get a lot of questions about is hook selection, especially for nymphs. Now, I mentioned all those different types of nymphs at the beginning of this video. However, we're now kind of refining it to just mayfly nymphs. And as I look through my fly boxes, I realized there are really just a couple different hooks that I've used for about 95% of my mayfly nymphs. And that's a really great thing because there are so many different varieties and sizes and names and numbers and manufacturers of hooks out there. So let's kind of just rein all this stuff back in, and let me start with that selection area that is just the basic general, that if you're just getting into this or you're not quite sure which direction to go, here's the suggestion that I have for you. Let's start easy, and the hook that we're going to go with is a nymph hook, and we're looking for the designation 1XL in either standard or heavy wire. So if we're thinking about this hook, it's going to be just a basic down eye hook. It might be a little bit heavier wire, which is going to help us with these nymphs because it's going to help them get down in the water column a little faster. And I like that 1XL. It kind of extends it just a little bit, especially if we decide to use a bead head. And I use beads on nearly all of my nymphs now, so that's something I'm going to recommend to you. By purchasing a 1XL hook, it basically just adds 1 eye length at the front of the hook, and that will basically be taken up by that bead, therefore making it a standard length hook. So kind of think about that. The sizes that I'm going to recommend are going to be kind of all over the place, but I'm going to recommend specific quantities in those sizes. So let's start with sizes 12, 14, and 16. I would recommend you purchasing 50 of each of those sizes. Those are easily the sizes I use most often. Now we're going to kind of go to a large and a small section as well. Let's think about size 10, size 18, and size 20s. And let's purchase 25 of those. So right there, it's looking like 150 plus another 75. We're looking at about 225 hooks, and that's going to cover a lot of your fly tying needs for mayflies. And the beautiful thing about this is that there's so many manufacturers selling hooks in packages of 25 and 50 now that if you realize you're truly starting to go crazy with size 16s, you can always buy more to supplement your collection. Now, I did talk about that second tier of materials, and in this category, there's one other hook that I like to use quite often, and it's one that, to me, just kind of makes it look a little buggier at times, and that's a caddis/scud hook. And it's got this kind of a funky bend to it, and to me, it almost just reminds me of an insect that's trying to curl up because it's in danger. And that labeling says caddis, and it says scud. Though we're tying mayflies, I really believe that look to it, that almost I'm not sure, that vulnerability that that hook seems to give off really has worked well for me over the years. And I'm thinking about pheasant tails, a lot of PMD nymphs and sulfur nymphs, and a lot of Baetis nymphs. I've really loved this hook for those. And this is going to be a scud hook. It's going to be a 1XS. That stands for extra short. So it's a little bit shorter. And even though I'm buying that XS, I tend to tie down further down the shank of that hook. So as I'm wrapping my thread back, I tend to really put that tail a lot further down. And if you'd like to find out any of the videos that I've tied one with that style, just email me or leave a comment below and I'll get you the link so you can kind of see exactly where I'm tying that in to kind of even things out, because we're buying a 1XS hook. The other thing I like with this hook is to buy it in either standard or heavy wire. Again, just to get a little bit more metal there so we can ensure that it gets down in the water a little faster. And on those hooks, I also do use beads. So I've gone through the sizes, I've gone through quantities, and the one thing that I have to caution you about is light wire nymph hooks. I've had some success with them over the years, but with certain manufacturers, I've purchased light wire nymph hooks and just have not had that much luck. I'm not going to call any manufacturer out here, but one of the problems that I've had with the hooks is that because we are running these deeper, they tend to snag occasionally. And that's bad enough, but whenever you do break free of that snag and you have a hook that's truly bent, it makes you wonder if that would hold up if you had that fish of a lifetime on. And I really prefer to make every cast thinking it's going to be that cast in which I'm going to catch a really nice trout. And I don't want to jeopardize that fish. Hence, I use standard or heavy wire. Now, if you've had any experiences with some light wire hooks and you'd like to mention them in the comments section below, please, by all means, mention those that you've had success with so we can kind of share out with others. As I mentioned earlier, I don't want to give a specific brand or hook recommendation just because there are so many out there and there are so many good ones when we're talking about these nymph hooks. But if you really, you've kind of narrowed it down to a few and you want to bounce some ideas off of me, then by all means, you're more than welcome to email me. My email is tcammisa@gmail.com. It's also listed in the description of this video, and I can tell you if I've had any experience with any of those that you're looking for. So that's just a little bit about hooks, and if you have really any other ideas about some hooks that you've had success with using them for Mayfly nymphs, again, please mention those in the comments section below. And now let's jump to a little easier category for me to cover. This category is threads, and I am going to make a specific brand recommendation, with that brand being Uni Products. I've been using Unithread for as long as I can remember, and it has never let me down, hence why I'm going to be mentioning it here. For the colors, I kind of think back to the way that I group my Mayfly nymphs, and it's basically light, medium, and dark patterns. And I kind of think the same way for these threads. There are 3 colors that I use for the majority of my nymphs, and then there's one color that I use for actually the body on a lot of my smaller nymphs. So these colors are quite simple. They are tan, brown, and black. And that body color I use a lot on those small blueing olive nymphs is olive. So those are the 4 colors that I'm absolutely going to suggest, with kind of that caution that if there's a fly out there that you know you're going to be using a thread body to imitate, and it's not one of these 4 colors, then by all means select that one as well and add it to this grouping. Sizing is another area in which I get quite a few questions. If you're a beginning tyer, then by all means I am going to recommend 6/0 thread. The reason is quite simple. It doesn't break as easily as 8/0, and I know there is nothing worse than having about 80% of your fly done and then something happens to that thread and the entire thing just completely unravels. So easy recommendations, these 4 colors in 6/0, with that second tier being the exact same colors yet in 8/0. Our next category is weight, and we're going to break that apart into wires and beads, and we'll start with wires. By wires, I basically mean this soft wire that we're going to be wrapping around the shank of the hook to add a little bit of weight to it, because we know that if we can make these flies just a little bit heavier, they're going to travel deeper down into the water column, hopefully to where those trout are feeding on Mayfly nymphs on the bottom of our local waterway. Now, I have, again, just a very simple recommendation for you, and that's to go out and buy 0.010 wire. That's the size that I've used for years on the majority of my Mayfly nymphs, and it has worked well for me, and it's the one that I recommend for you. If you are fishing waterways that have just a little bit more current, or if you know you're going to be fishing larger nymphs and you might need a little bit more weight, then that second tier of wire would be 0.015. It's just a little bit heavier. It will bulk up your fly just a little bit more. But again, if you're going to be using really larger flies, go with that just a little bit greater size. But again, for nearly all of my fly tying, the Mayfly Nymphs, I'm using 0.010 wire. The next area of weight that we're going to discuss is beads. Now, I absolutely love to tie and fish with beadhead Mayfly Nymphs, and they are so effective, especially for a couple of reasons, at least in my opinion. For starters, that bead is going to add just a little bit more weight, which is going to help it just get down in the hurry and hopefully stay at the bottom of that water column. Also, you have the chance for a little bit of light to reflect off that bead, hopefully capturing the trout's attention. Now, there are lots of choices out there with beads, but you're going to come to an immediate junction whenever you start your search, and that's whether to go with brass or tungsten. There are two main differences in my mind, and that is weight and cost. Now, for starters, tungsten is much heavier than brass, and it's also more expensive. So you have to kind of weigh all those options out there and figure out what's best for you. If you know you're going to be fishing in a lot of shallow water, then you may want to opt for the brass because you don't have to worry about that fly getting down in a hurry, and you can supplement it with split shot. If you know you're going to be fishing in a lot of fast runs in deeper water, and you don't want to really just be guessing and constantly putting on and taking off a lot of split shot, then I'm going to encourage you to go out and purchase tungsten. I can tell you that early in my fly tying days, I really stocked up on a lot of brass beads and really went that direction. Once tungsten came out, I saw, geez, that it was a pretty significant price difference, and I didn't want to make that commitment to go and buy all those beads again in tungsten. Though over the last few years, I've realized that tungsten really just seems to pay off, and it truly does help that fly to get down in a hurry. It definitely costs more, but in my opinion, it really does pay for itself. And I'm not going to go out there and say I've caught more fish because of the tungsten. However, I do believe that these flies are a little bit more effective when they're staying in that zone where we want them to be, which is right on the bottom with these nymphs. Now, we also have some choices for sizes and for colors. So if I'm going to talk about just that main tier of bead that I'm going to recommend you purchasing, then I'm going to say there are two sizes out there that I would say to purchase in one color. The sizes are 2mm or 5/64 and 2.5mm, and which is also 3/32. And I would recommend purchasing in those two sizes the color gold. It just looks really nice. It gives that nice sparkle. Those are two sizes that will cover a lot of nymph hooks, and then you can adjust accordingly. Now, in that next tier that we're going to kind of talk about, that if you feel like, yeah, you've exhausted that size, that's covering it, but you could definitely use a few more options, then I'm going to say stick with that size, but then supplement the colors. Let's change them out a little bit. Aside from gold, some of the more popular colors that I love to use are black and silver. And within that silver, if I have the opportunity, I'm going to go with those disco beads. They just look incredible, and they reflect so much light off of them. From that point, then you can kind of tier off into other sizes, maybe go a little bit smaller, those 1.5mm, which you can use on those size 20 and size 22 hooks, or go a little bit larger, up to 3mm. I know there are some that sell 2.8mm beads as well. But again, if you're going to stick with, you're just trying this out, you want to know just bottom line, what should you get? Then I'm going to, again, stick with 2mm beads, 2.5mm beads, and I would go with the color gold. Following the weight category, I think it's appropriate that we make a semi-return to wires, though these ones are going to be in different sizes, used for different reasons. Now, if you think back to that drawing that I showed you earlier of the Mayfly Nymph, where hopefully you did a Google search of a real one, you saw that abdomen that's broken into 10 segments. And those are relatively prominent segments on a Mayfly Nymph. Thus, by adding this thin wire to it and keeping it a decent distance apart from one another from the wraps, we can create some type of a segmentation that's going to look relatively similar to the natural insect. The other reason we really love to use these thin wires is because it helps to protect the pattern. There are a lot of materials out there that we use that are fragile, such as a buyout body. And if we wrap that buyout body in, we then can counter wrap this wire in, basically wrapping it in the opposite direction to add a little bit more durability to the pattern. So if you tend to catch a lot of fish on that fly that you're using, which I hope you do, you're more than likely going to beat up that fly a little bit, but this is just going to extend its longevity for hopefully at least another 6 or 7 fish. Now with that said, whenever I take a step back and I think about all the different colors and sizes that I have of these wires, which is a ton. You can look over my shoulder, I'm not sure, I think it's my left shoulder, and you probably see around 25 of them right there, and that's just the beginning of my wire collection. I have tons that I use for so many different reasons and so many different purposes. However, if I had to narrow it down to selecting just 2, it would be absolutely easy. The first one would be copper. It's just an all-around great color that is a must-have in any fly tyers collection if you're tying any nymphs whatsoever, especially mayflies. The second color is silver. I really love this color. I really think that it just kind of stands out against so many different body colors, and I would recommend having one of each of these colors in size small. Now, those are the 2 that I turn to the most frequently. But we're next going to talk about that next tier of sizes and colors, because I believe there are a lot more out there that I could recommend to you. Now, if we stick with that same size, if we're sticking with small, then the other 2 colors that I would recommend considering would be brown and black. Now, if we go one size up, that size is typically referred to as brassy size. It's a little bit of a larger wire, and in some cases you can actually use that for the body material. The colors that I would recommend in that size would be black, olive, and brown. So with all those colors and sizes listed, basically 2 sizes and around a half dozen colors, that will cover easily the majority of your fly tying needs for mayfly nymphs, and it will also transfer to other nymphs that you'll be tying on a regular basis. Now, if you are sitting out there right now and you're thinking, geez, Tim, you forgot about this color, then again, by all means, please mention it in the comments section below and tell me why you think it's an absolutely essential one to add to this collection. For this last section of part 1 of this recommendations for Mayfly nymph materials, we're going to just briefly talk about head cement, and there's one that I'm going to recommend above all others. I'm going to give the specific brand in this case. It's Sally Hansen Hard as Nails Hardener. This is the head cement that I've been using for as long as I could remember. There are so many pluses with it. It's reasonably priced. It lasts a long time. If it ever begins to harden, you can always add a little bit of nail polish remover and it will just basically come back to life. It's easy to apply. It comes with an applicator, and how I typically apply it is by simply unscrewing the cap and just dabbing a little bit on my thread, completing my whip finish, and it's locked the thread in place. You can also dip a needle point in here, apply it to your fly that way, but this is easily the brand that I'm going to recommend. There are others out there at a lower price. I haven't used them. I really haven't felt the need to use them. This is the one that I'm going to say I recommend above all others. Now that's we'll say the basic category. If you're looking for the next tier of head cements, I believe that tier right now consists of more like the UV glues. We don't necessarily use those to seal the fly, but there are some other things that we can do with those glues. I don't want to get into really too many details about them in this video because there's a lot of things that are associated with them, including high cost. The glue is going to cost easily $10 to $20 right off the bat, plus you have to buy a flashlight to cure it. That's not a major commitment by any means, but it's something that I don't think is an absolute essential in the world of fly tying right now. I can tell you I've used about a dozen of them. I can't necessarily recommend one UV glue over the other whenever I think about all the factors, but I can tell you hopefully in the next 6 months or so I plan on having a video basically summarizing all my thoughts related to UV glues. And if you have any thoughts on them, please, again, by all means, mention them in the comments section below and let us know how you're using UV glues to really, I don't want to say supplement, but to highlight your Mayfly nymphs. But if we're forgetting about UV glues for now, stick with Sally Hansen. It's worked for me. Well, that wraps up all the information in this part 1 of the 2-part series in which I'm making recommendations for selecting materials to tie Mayfly nymphs. Now, there may be some materials that I forgot to have on this list, or there might be some that you disagree with, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on what I've mentioned so far. So please, if you think of anything else, mention it in the comments section below, because most importantly, if there's someone new to fly tying, I don't want them to take this list that I've previously provided and just think, that's it. I'd also like them to check out the comment section so they know that there might be another discussion going on involving another material, and they're going to kind of hear and think about our reasoning behind some other selections. To tease you a little bit more for part 2, I'm going to be discussing a lot of other great selections, including tailing fibers, body and wing case materials, the legs, the thorax, and I'm also going to have a brief discussion related to hot spots. Well, in the meantime, if you'd like to watch more of my fly tying and fly fishing videos, you can check out my website, which is troutandfeather.com. I also have a Facebook page, and if you like that, you'll receive regular fly tying and fly fishing updates. If you have any questions or comments regarding this video, then by all means, please reach out to me. You can email me at tcammisa@gmail.com, or you can leave a message in the comments section below. Well, as always, thank you so much for watching this video, part 1. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you look forward to part 2, which I hope to release soon.